episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor. Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show with another fascinating guest for you who is really involved in creating a better tomorrow on some very interesting fronts. Today we have the honor of being joined by Dr. James Carter, who is the Senior Director of the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, which is an organization that's committed to helping athletes optimize their health and performance through research and education in both hydration and nutrition science. The Gatorade Sports Science Institute was founded back in 1985, part of the Pepsi company's life sciences division. And with a PhD from the University of Birmingham in sports and exercise sciences, where his work focused on endurance exercise and the relationship between carbohydrate supplementation, environmental heat stress, and performance, Dr. Carter has been working for about 17 years in the application of exercise physiology and sporting in occupational settings. During his PhD, Dr. Carter carried out physiology consultancy projects with the Ministry of Defense and the Chelsea Football Club. Following that, spent 8 years working for the UK-based occupational physiology company Optimal Performance Limited, providing scientific support to the Ministry of Defense, the Home Office, and the Department of Health. And then there was another 4 years he spent in the United Arab Emirates on behalf of the company, setting up and helping to run a health sports medicine center for the UAE Armed Forces. Dr. Carter joined the Gatorade team in 2012. He accepted the helm of director in 2015 and has spent 4 years at the headquarters in Illinois before returning to the UK, where he is now. Throughout his career, Dr. Carter has published numerous peer-reviewed journal articles, is a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine, and has presented internationally at a range of sports science and occupational physiology conferences. Dr. James Carter, welcome to the show today.
Yeah, thank you, Ira. Good to be here.
It's great having you. It's a very exciting set of topics. I'd love to start off like we typically do by handing you the floor for a few minutes, just to talk a little bit more about yourself and sort of the early days, everything from where you grew up, how you developed these interests in sports and exercise sciences and exercise physiology, and a little bit of that early career journey. I think that'd be a great way to set the stage for what you're doing now. Yes,
certainly. I guess I grew up originally on the kind of the east side of the UK and kind of East Anglia, but then moved across to the West Country, so kind of Herefordshire and Gloucestershire in the UK, and managed to miss the kind of accents on both sides. So I guess I've got some sort of neutral English accent. Went to school in Gloucestershire, so if you live in, well, at least if you go to school in Gloucester, you need to play two sports. You need to play rugby and you need to play cricket. So okay. I played both of those, and also field hockey. I get a bit of ribbing from my American colleagues when I say that I play field hockey, because they're not so familiar with males playing field hockey.
Right.
But that was my kind of sporting background. I was pretty good at field hockey. Managed to represent England up to kind of 21 level, and then I snapped my Achilles tendon and really had to kind of focus, I guess, outside of the playing field. But really, growing up, like many people, Ira, growing up playing sport, and for large chunks of my life, early life, I guess sport was my life. The logical thing to do at university was something related to sport, especially because I wasn't going to make it professional in any sport. So sports science was the kind of was my program that I studied at the University of Birmingham in the Midlands here in the UK. Snapped my Achilles right at the end of my undergraduate degree, and so was kind of thinking, well, what am I going to do? I mean, I can't play any sport. I've got my degree pretty much wrapped up. I need a lot of physio, a lot of rehab. And so I kind of fell into doing a PhD also at Birmingham, and I kind of focused on cycling and endurance activity, carbohydrate feeding, and also threw in some heat stress as well. And that took me to kind of 2003, 2004, and then really it's a kind of case of not just what you know, but also who you know. Yep. And one of my PhD supervisors was one of his old students had his own company, occupational physiology company, and was needing some data scientists really to go into the field and collect data for some of their clients. I got stuck into that for a couple of months, and that turned into a couple of years, and then that turned into a stint in the Middle East as well. And then I joined PepsiCo and the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, and that's where I am now.
Excellent, excellent. And you know, obviously there's not too many people, because it's such a popular brand, that have not heard of Gatorade. I have 3 children over here that sort of drink it like water. Gatorade Sports Science Institute was, you know, founded a few decades ago. Didn't know much about it when I was first reading about it, but talk just a little bit about the history, if you would. I know you're committed to sort of optimizing health and performance, but you really have a very sprawling network in terms of laboratories. You do a lot of university partnerships. Just talk us a little through Gatorade Sports Science Institute.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, as you said, it's been around for a number of decades. I mean, it really started in '85. I mean, to be honest, you could actually argue that the first kind of Gatorade scientists were Dr. Robert Cade and his team at the University of Florida, who essentially invented the Gatorade formula back in '65, and that was a coming together of sports medicine experts, scientists, and athletes and coaches, and problem solving, and coming up with a solution which was, born in the lab, proven on the field. 20 years later, Gatorade had kind of grown into this established brand, leading the way really in sports drinks. And then in the mid '80s, GSSI was also kind of formally established, and has always been headquartered in Chicago, or in Chicagoland, I guess. And then, I joined in 2012. So very much, we've had 25 years before that time. And really, the crux of our work for that first 2 decades was very much centered on hydration and heat stress, and what are the physical limitations for athlete performance in hot conditions, and how can you try and kind of maintain performance, or indeed extend that kind of performance envelope. And that's given rise to the kind of Gatorade hydration portfolio as it is today. But also, over the last more recently, more than 10, 15 years, Gatorade has been turning much more to kind of sports nutrition, sports fuel, not just hydration. Right. And that's really kind of gone hand in hand with the way that GSSI has tried to serve that business. And so we've now gone from one facility in Barrington, which is our Illinois headquarters, to having a facility at the IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida. Then to having a footprint in the UK, which is when I joined the team. And then much more recently, we've opened up another satellite facility in Texas, so on the Star campus, which is the Dallas Cowboys kind of world headquarters. Yeah. We're part of their sports medicine partner kind of building just across the street there. And so we've now got this quite extensive footprint, but it provides us very much with that same model that Dr. Robert Cade had, that kind of lab and field model. And we can very quickly do kind of closed clinical research in Barrington in our climate chamber. We've got very established biochemistry facilities there. But we can also, of course, do work with athletes in their own environment. IMG have got acres and acres of sporting fields, 50, 60 soccer fields, basketball, baseball, American football, track and field, golf. So they've got a really elaborate, I guess, sporting setup that we can also essentially conduct research on. And then Frisco gives us something different again. We've got access to, obviously, high school American football, but also we're doing more work now with the forever athlete in terms of kind of health and wellness, and fitness. So it's, we've developed this model over years, but to be very strategic. And then, so, in summary, Ira, we essentially have got two sides to the work that we do now. We've got traditional R&D in terms of innovation and research, so that, and many companies have that kind of R&D arm, of course. But then we've got an education team whose job is to spread the message of backed by science, led by science, and why that's important. And then we've got a bit of an anomaly within a kind of food and beverage company, because we've got a service team whose job is to go out and provide kind of sports science consultancy work to Gatorade teams and Gatorade athletes around the world. And that's just a way that we can provide, added value to those partners.
And, you outlined that you are at GSSI everything before, during, and after the exercise process, and you're involved in a variety of these different categories. Obviously, mentioned you got your start in hydration and thermoregulation, and I'd love to sort of first start there, because you've really made sort of a science out of sweat, and there you had a paper recently, fascinating, entitled "Skin Interface Microfluidic System with Personalized Sweating Rate and Sweat Chloride Analytics for Sports Science Applications." It was in Science magazine. And we talk a lot about sort of wearables and some of the things that we can learn nowadays with some of these new technologies. Talk a little bit about this, though, because it's a science of sweat, but really it's not just water and some ions. There's a lot of interesting things that you can learn about overall biology through these types of technologies. Talk a little bit about this particular paper and some of what you think about when you think about sweat.
Yeah, it's thanks for bringing that up. We're really proud of that paper in Science Advances. It's a big impact journal, and we don't kind of publish in the kind of Science Advances journals. Typically, we're much more focused on kind of sports science and sports nutrition and sports medicine. So this was a different direction. That publication is released in 2020, but we've actually been working specifically on this kind of technology for a number of years, back to kind of 2013, 2014 time. Really with the intent. A couple of things. Firstly, we've always been in the business and interested in personalized nutrition. So making sure that nutrition solutions are fit for purpose, fit for the athlete in question, fit for their sport, preferences, demands of the sport, so on and so forth. And this sweat patch is an unlock to an athlete being able to personalize their hydration. But I think we're also interested in it because, and this has probably been accelerated even more by COVID, but athletes want to be more in control, I think, of their performance, of their preparation. And for years, for decades, GSSI has been really specifically for our service piece, it's specifically been a service reserved for the elite and professional athletes. But we see this sweat patch and the accompanying kind of digital app as being essentially GSSI in your pocket. So democratizing kind of sports science, democratizing GSSI, which on the one hand might put GSSI out of business, I guess, but on the other hand, it gives athletes more control over how they design their own nutrition strategies by using the sweat patch as one tool in their toolbox to do that. And essentially, the smart sweat patch, it measures two things. It measures sweat rate, so how much fluid you're losing through sweat in any given time during whatever exercise or activity you're wearing the sweat patch for. And secondly, it looks at your sweat sodium loss, and sodium is important. There's a number of electrolytes in sweat, but we feel that sodium is the most important electrolyte, and so this gives the athlete a handle on those two, on those two parameters. And sweating rate and sweat sodium loss, highly variable. So, Ira, you might be doing the same exercise as me. We might be exercising at a similar work rate, but we might have very different sweat rates due to a number of factors.
Sure.
You know, we've tested thousands of athletes. The average sweat rate is about 1 litre an hour, which is 32 fluid ounces an hour. But you know, the range, we've seen it going from 0.5 litre all the way up to 4 or 5 litres an hour, massive range. And so we don't think it's one size fits all. We'd rather athletes have a kind of plan. This sweat patch gives them an unlock into that plan.
James, another really fascinating area, and once again, talking about before, during, and after, you know, sort of additional after is sort of sleep, which has become such a hot topic everywhere nowadays, it seems. And you know, we've talked actually on other episodes about, you know, relationship to sleep and sort of mental health and Alzheimer's, dementia, things of this nature. You are also at the Gatorade Institute looking at optimizing sleep quality and quantity and looking at nutrition in this context. Can you say a few things about some of the things that you're learning in regard to sleep and obviously recovery from exercise, but at the same time, any interesting health and wellness benefits other than just the recovery that you're studying at Gatorade?
Yeah, I mean, sleep, as you said, it's a fundamental. It's a fundamental for life. And I think personally, I think it's one of the most important things that anybody can be doing for themselves. If you're not looking after sleep and you're not trying to, you know, look after quality and quantity of sleep, then a lot of other things are probably, you know, by the by, quite frankly. So from an athlete perspective and from a GSSI perspective, I think we've got 3 main interests. I think our first interest is purely informational. So, you know, when you look at athletes, be them adolescent athletes or adult athletes, but we're interested, quite frankly, in just the basics. You know, what are their sleeping habits? What are their challenges? What are their hurdles to getting good quality sleep? You know, what is the reality today? So that's the first thing, and that kind of underpins, you know, subsequent work. Then I think our 2 other interests are, firstly, well, from a sports nutrition or from a nutrition perspective, can we move the needle in terms of sleep quality or sleep quantity? And so recently we've been involved with some work in Australia. Dr. Shona Howson from Australia Catholic University, formerly of the Australian Institute of Sport, has done some work that we've been involved with, looking at different blends and seeing if we can impact sleep quality and quantity, and that's been published fairly recently, and it was really encouraging. And I think one of the most encouraging things is not only did we see an improvement in athletes getting to sleep quicker, we also found no side effects. Now, one of the negative things of some of the other sleep aids that are available is that they do come with side effects, like, you know,
Sure,
typically you might wake up feeling groggy. We didn't see that in this study. So, you know, we're going to look to kind of continue that work, because ultimately, as you know, Ira, you know, Gatorade is part of PepsiCo, and we're all in the business of selling nutrition, essentially food and beverages. And so we're very interested in can we take that research forward and ultimately commercialize. Now, the other aspect is that if you think about the sleep occasion, again, it's variable, but let's say it's 8 hours of essentially downtime. It's 8 hours of limited to no movement, and it's 8 hours of no nutrition. And what we know is that the body will continue to break down protein over those 8 hours, because the 2 main drivers of protein synthesis are movement and nutrition and eating, essentially. And so if you don't do either, what you tend to do is you move into a negative period of protein turnover, so you're breaking down more than you are making. And so we're interested in, can we, and a number of other groups are also interested in this, you know, what can you do within the window before sleep, just before sleep, to try and increase protein synthesis in that 8 hours, so the athlete isn't breaking down too much protein or going into a negative state. So those are our interests, Ira, at the moment, and I think they will continue.
Very interesting. James, one other area that we spend a lot of time on the show is the topic of longevity and healthy aging. I think it was just actually yesterday, one of your colleagues at the Institute, Dr. Ian Rollo, was presenting at a longevity conference, and the topic, the real-world applications of aging, biology, and aesthetics, nutrition, and consumer health. Obviously, this is a booming area nowadays. Could you say a few words about, obviously nothing confidential, but how Gatorade and Gatorade Sports Science Institute looks at the topic of aging? Is it sort of a muscle sarcopenia type thing? What types of areas you're looking at specifically when focused on healthy aging?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's certainly again, I think it's been accelerated by COVID, hasn't it? The interest in health span. I mean, you might not be able to shift the length of time you live, but I think you can certainly shift the amount of time you are healthy within whatever time you have. And so I think our interests really are kind of twofold. I think our biggest interest actually is beyond Gatorade and beyond athletes, because GSSI sits within the life science R&D category. You explained that in the introduction, Ira. And life sciences is interested in two things. It's interested in how do we continue to innovate and help innovate for our core businesses like Gatorade, like Quaker, so on and so forth. But secondly, what's around the corner for our consumers thinking about being science-led. Now, healthy aging isn't around the corner, but I think it's an area where PepsiCo is interested. Life sciences are definitely interested, and so we're exploring it from that perspective. I would say in the first instance. That said, Gatorade is the broader kind of sports and fitness business unit within PepsiCo. Sure. Are also interested in kind of, I guess, increasing its athlete aperture. For decades, our focus has been very much the kind of core competitive athlete, that team sport athlete, the endurance athlete who's laser focused on performance. But I think Gatorade also has a role to play with fitness athletes, with forever athletes. Let's say these are individuals, I guess, like me, who used to be playing team sports on a weekly basis, daily basis, but now less so. More things to be doing, I guess, off the sports field, families and jobs and other interests. But I'm still by nature interested in kind of competing with myself, I guess, now. Whether it's going out on my road bike and trying to take a Strava segment, or getting in the gym and pretending I'm strong, all of those kind of things. And so as those athletes kind of get older, their bodies encounter more challenges, and so I think Gatorade does have a role to play there as well. And so I guess those are our two broad interests. But what I'd also say is that there's some really interesting kind of parallels that I'm seeing. There's parallels with athletes and aging, and you talked about kind of the sarcopenia piece with as you age, you get less sensitive to, again, that protein synthesis, so the exercise and the feeding. So you might need to eat more protein, for example, the older you get. So there's some parallels there between the two groups, especially around things like protein, physical activity, and maybe some of the other supplements that are involved with muscle health. But there's also some interesting kind of parallels with athletes and e-sport athletes, so traditional athletes and e-sport athletes. E-sports is, as you may be aware, it's booming, isn't it? I mean, it's incredible. Again, spurred by COVID, I think, and people being stuck at home. But then there's also kind of, if you triangulate everything, there's also some interesting parallels between gamers, esports, and healthy aging. And if you kind of combine things like gaming and exergaming and computerized cognitive training, perhaps neurofeedback training as well, are there benefits to be had for the maintenance of cognitive function, for example, memory, decision making, attention? And again, some of my life sciences colleagues are also interested in those parallels as well. So yeah, it's a fascinating space.
And just you got me thinking of one other thing while we're on this theme. As you know, I had Ellen de Brabander on a couple months ago, and Ellen's very looking at some of these technologies you're mentioning in digital and Internet of Things. She's very into customization and the fact that we have these giant brands that sell billions of dollars, but with these new technologies, I'm not a forever athlete. Maybe what's good for the 53-year-old Ira Pastor, a slightly different product than Dr. James Carter. What's your feel? I mean, you mentioned obviously the sweat patch and things of sort of democratization of all this stuff. What are your thoughts on some of sort of the personalized nutrition, that there will, the ability now to really craft not one product, but maybe multiple products for sort of the different stages of life for that forever athlete or the sort of forever half athlete here?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because when I was thinking about this upcoming podcast, I was thinking about some of the more kind of forward-thinking kind of areas of discussion, I've mentioned it a few times, but I am interested in the acceleration of things caused by this global pandemic, and I think there's been an acceleration and interest in functional, good for you ingredients that play in the health and wellness space, of course, in immune function being a big one.
Oh yeah.
But I do think, to your point, that digitalization and which lends itself, of course, to personalized nutrition has also been accelerated, and together with e-commerce and so on and so forth. And then I think ubiquitous sensors are almost part and parcel of nutrition, personalized nutrition. So it's difficult to have truly personalized nutrition without having diagnostic tools. That's where the sensors come in. Perhaps the sweat patch is one of those, but there's lots of other sensors. And then it kind of says to me, well, if you've got full digitalization and you've got the ability to personalize and you've got all these ubiquitous sensors, then I wonder if in 5 years' time we're not going to be conducting kind of clinical research in the same way. We're actually in living labs, getting much greater sample sizes, which will take, which will deal with the kind of noise factor because you can't control it, but doing work in the real world using these sensors and the Internet of Things to kind of to reveal kind of almost clinical grade results. So I think that's one of my areas of interest in that whole kind of personalized, digitized space. So and I think there's absolutely going to be a boom in the next 5 or 10 years, and we've been accelerated into that boom with the global pandemic.
Absolutely. James, we get a lot of people contacting the show after these episodes. Definitely get a lot from this one, from sort of the next generation, the sort of the senior in high school that's headed off to college. They're an athlete, not exactly sure what to study, but they're going to be listening to this and they go, wow, I want to work with Dr. James Carter one day. I want to be the next Dr. James Carter. Some suggestions, if you would, for sort of that next generation that wants to really get active in this space and sort of follow in what you're doing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the first thing that needs to be said when you're thinking about a career in sports science in general, and sports science is pretty broad, is that it's a really busy space. It's kind of year on year since the early noughties, sports science kind of intake at universities has increased. Universities have tried to increase their own course sizes every year to get more, to accommodate more. So every year there's thousands of people who are graduating wanting similar stuff, wanting a similar career path. So first of all, you need to go into it with your eyes open. Now, that's not to put people off, but it is a reality check.
Sure.
So that's the first thing. It's going to be very competitive, which means you need to differentiate yourself in any way possible. And so certainly if you're going to have a career in academia, or if you want to be a kind of subject matter expert, or even a very kind of qualified practitioner, so a strength coach or a registered dietitian, then an undergraduate degree is highly unlikely to be, your only academic qualification. So be prepared that, it's going to be a journey that you're going to go on. And then also in parallel, to don't leave it to the end, in parallel, you need to get experiences, volunteer, internships, whatever you do, you can do to get hands-on, practical, real-world, relevant experience, which will also lead, of course, to your network and expanding your network. Because as I said to you in my opening question, Ira, it's as much what you know, but also who you know. And I certainly wouldn't be here without having built a network of like-minded individuals who are, who at the time and probably now still are, bigger and better than I am at what I do. And then finally, thinking back to when I was at my undergraduate, and that was 97, 97 to 2000, there was always a chunk of the undergraduates on my course, so 10, 15 perhaps, who were doing joint degrees. And I think, what are you doing that for? Surely it's just about sports science. I mean, what? But they were doing sports science and materials, for example. And it makes a lot more sense now, because I think it's going back to that differentiation and where and how science is evolving and how it's done is evolving. So if you can bring to the table both expertise in sports science, but also an expertise in data analytics or machine learning or computational chemistry, or any of the various omics, so metabolomics, genomics, whatever it is, these are all things that are highly relevant and I think will be relevant in 5 years' time. So think about what you can do together with just your sports science piece.
Excellent. James, the final question here, obviously coming back to you now and some of that, obviously that advice, you've had an amazing career, you've been in industry, academia, you've worked with the military, government. Take a few minutes, if you would, just to mention, shout out to sort of important mentors, influencers, specifically in your career that, the types of people that if it wasn't for them, Dr. James Carter would be off practicing law or real estate or doing something totally different. Take some time with that one if you wish.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's nice to kind of reflect on, on that piece of your life, I guess. And I think there's always going to be the expected people that you're going to list as mentors and influences. So for me, I had 2 PhD supervisors. I didn't get one, I got 2, good and bad, to be honest. Because it's you being pulled in different directions and you've got to please 2 people, not one. But I had 2, Professor David Jones and Professor Asker Ukendrup. Asker then became my manager, my boss in PepsiCo for my first part of my career. And both of those undoubtedly shaped how I think about science and and how I approach kind of problem solving. And then, of course, again, your first boss is always going to be an important influence on your life, I think. And I was lucky to have a wonderful first kind of boss, and Dr. Mark Rayson, with that kind of consultancy work that we were doing with the Ministry of Health and the Defence and so on and so forth. Taught me a lot about kind of managing and balancing the peaks and the troughs, which is even now, it's probably more than ever now, it's harder to do when you're working from home and your office and your kitchen and your bedroom all becomes blurred into one 24-hour cycle. But yeah, the ability to jump when you need to jump, but to rest and relax and have some fun when you, quite frankly, you don't. It's really been important. Then when you move into a kind of prolonged career like I've got at PepsiCo at the moment, you meet some great people. I had a fantastic manager in a lady called Apoka Kwapong, who was Ghanaian, but lives not too far from you actually, Ira, now in Connecticut. And she taught me a lot about the business, but also a lot about people. But then I think the important thing, Ira, for me is that it's always important to have kind of formal mentors, and they're typically work orientated. But it's really important to kind of go beyond that and to have and to embrace your friends, maybe your sport coaches, people in diverse roles who you don't really have a kind of formal interaction with at all, but who will undoubtedly, you'll probably end up spending large chunks of your life with, and you'll absorb a huge amount. So yeah, I've got too many to mention, but yeah, hockey coach, good friends who've taught me a lot about life, and yeah, without any of these individuals, I'd be a different person. Probably not here talking to you. So yeah.
Really good stuff. Yeah, it's fascinating seeing this path for you, James, and really continue to follow it, and wishing you the best with all of this and everything that you have under your umbrella there. For everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode on the podcast or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to Dr. James Carter, Senior Director of the Gatorade Sports Science Institute. James, I want to take the time to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to do this. Thank you for everything you're doing in the realm of sports and exercise sciences. And as we say on our show, thank you for helping to move things forward to a better tomorrow for all of us via your work. It's really very inspiring.
Thank you. And look, I really appreciate the invitation, and hopefully the listeners will learn a little bit and have enjoyed it. And yeah, and maybe next time we can do this somewhat in person, which would be a lot of fun.
That would be nice. Be well.